The morning sun cast long shadows across the remote military outpost as Sarah Martinez cleaned her rifle for the third time that week. At 24 years old, she never imagined she would be holding a sniper rifle in the mountains of Afghanistan, let alone becoming the last line of defense for an entire village. Her journey to this moment began 3 years earlier in a small Texas town where the biggest excitement was the Friday night football games. Sarah grew up on her grandfather's ranch, where shooting was as natural as breathing. Every weekend, she would practice with his old hunting rifle, hitting targets at distances that impressed even the local veterans. Her grandfather, a Korean War veteran named Miguel Martinez, had taught her that shooting was about patience, breathing, and understanding the wind. He never spoke much about his time in the war, but his steady hands and calm demeanor showed Sarah what real courage looked like. When Sarah graduated from high school, college seemed like the obvious choice. Her parents, both teachers, had saved money for years to give her the education they never had. But Sarah felt restless, like something was calling her beyond the familiar borders of her small town. The military recruiter who visited their high school painted a picture of adventure, purpose, and the chance to serve something bigger than herself. Against her parents' wishes, Sarah enlisted in the Army. Basic training at Fort Benning was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The drill sergeants were tough, but fair. They quickly noticed her exceptional marksmanship skills during the shooting qualifications. While other recruits struggled to hit targets at 300 meters, Sarah was consistently hitting bullseyes at 500 meters with iron sights. Her platoon sergeant, a grizzled veteran named Staff Sergeant Johnson, pulled her aside after one particularly impressive shooting session. "Martinez, have you ever considered becoming a sniper?" he asked, his weathered face serious under his campaign hat. Sarah had heard about snipers, but she thought they were all men, all special forces operators who had been in the military for years. The idea that she, a small-town girl from Texas, could join their ranks seemed impossible. But Staff Sergeant Johnson explained that the Army was looking for soldiers with natural talent, patience, and the mental toughness to handle the pressure of long-range precision shooting. The sniper school application process was grueling. Sarah had to pass additional physical fitness tests, psychological evaluations, and advanced marksmanship assessments. Many candidates were eliminated before they even reached the school. But Sarah's combination of natural shooting ability, ranch-hardened physical conditioning, and quiet determination carried her through each challenge. When she finally arrived at the United States Army Sniper School at Fort Benning, Sarah was one of only 3 women in a class of 42 students. The instructors made it clear from day one that they didn't care about gender, background, or anything except performance. Either you could make the shot when it mattered, or you couldn't. There was no middle ground in sniper training. The first week focused on the fundamentals of precision shooting. Students learned about different rifle systems, ammunition types, and the complex mathematics of long-range ballistics. Sarah discovered that successful sniping involved much more than just good aim. She had to calculate for wind speed and direction, air pressure, humidity, temperature, and even the rotation of the earth for extremely long shots. Her ranch background with hunting and her natural aptitude for mathematics served her well. The fieldcraft portion of training was the most challenging for many students. Snipers had to be invisible, capable of moving through hostile territory undetected, and remaining hidden for hours or even days while waiting for their target. Sarah's small frame, which had sometimes made her feel disadvantaged during other military training, became an asset in concealment exercises. She could hide in spaces that larger soldiers couldn't access and move through brush without creating the disturbance that bigger team members might cause. But the most difficult aspect of sniper training wasn't the shooting or the hiding. It was the psychological preparation. The instructors spent considerable time discussing the reality of what snipers might be asked to do in combat. Unlike infantry soldiers who might engage targets at close range in the chaos of battle, snipers often had time to observe their targets, to see them as individuals before taking the shot. This psychological burden was something that not every soldier could handle. Sarah struggled with these discussions initially. Growing up hunting with her grandfather, she had always been taught to respect the life of any animal she might take. The idea of using her skills against human beings, even enemy combatants, required a significant mental adjustment. But her instructors helped her understand that sniper operations were often about protecting friendly forces and innocent civilians. A well-placed sniper shot could prevent larger battles that might result in many more casualties. During the stalking exercises, Sarah learned to move like a ghost through different terrains. Students had to approach within 200 meters of instructor positions without being detected, set up their shooting position, and take a shot at a target. The instructors used powerful binoculars and had decades of experience spotting hidden soldiers. Most first attempts ended with the humiliating experience of having an instructor point directly at a student's hiding position and explain exactly what had given them away. Sarah failed her first stalking exercise, like most students did. Her camouflage was good, her movement was quiet, but she had chosen a position that silhouetted her against the skyline when viewed from a particular angle. The instructor's feedback was detailed and constructive, but the failure stung. That night, Sarah studied terrain maps and photos, trying to understand how to better analyze potential hiding positions. Her second stalking attempt was successful. She approached within 150 meters of the instructor position, set up behind a fallen log with carefully arranged vegetation to break up her outline, and took her shot without being detected. The sense of accomplishment was tremendous, but Sarah knew this was just one of many challenges she would face in the coming weeks. The advanced marksmanship training pushed students to their limits. They practiced shooting in various weather conditions, from different positions, and at targets placed at increasingly challenging distances. Sarah's natural abilities continued to serve her well, but she also learned the value of consistent practice and attention to detail. Small errors in rifle setup, breathing technique, or trigger control could result in missed shots at long range. One particularly memorable training exercise involved shooting at targets placed at 800 meters in a strong crosswind. Many students struggled to compensate for the wind's effect on their bullets, but Sarah's experience with Texas weather patterns helped her read the wind conditions more effectively. She was one of only 7 students to hit the target on their first attempt. The graduation exercise was designed to test everything students had learned over the previous months. Each student was given a complex scenario involving multiple targets at various distances, time pressure, and simulated battlefield conditions. Sarah's scenario involved protecting a convoy from enemy positions located on a hillside 600 meters away. She had to identify which of several figures were actual threats, calculate the ballistics for her shots, and engage the targets before they could attack the friendly forces. Sarah took her time with the first shot, carefully calculating for the wind and distance. The target fell immediately. The second target was partially concealed behind cover, requiring a precise shot through a small gap. Sarah controlled her breathing, squeezed the trigger smoothly, and watched the second target fall. The instructors confirmed both hits, and Sarah officially became a qualified Army sniper. After graduation, Sarah was assigned to a reconnaissance unit that was preparing for deployment to Afghanistan. The mission briefings painted a picture of a complex operational environment where American forces worked alongside Afghan military units to combat Taliban insurgents and secure remote villages. Sarah's unit would be responsible for providing overwatch and long-range precision fires in support of these operations. The deployment preparation involved additional training specific to the Afghan environment. Sarah learned about the unique challenges of shooting at high altitude, where thinner air could affect bullet trajectory. She studied the terrain features of her assigned area of operations, learning to recognize the types of buildings, vegetation, and geographical features she would encounter. The intelligence briefings described a sophisticated enemy that used the mountainous terrain to their advantage, often attacking from concealed positions at long range. Sarah's family gathered for a farewell dinner before her deployment. Her grandfather, now in his 80s, took her aside for a private conversation. He spoke more about his experiences in Korea than he ever had before, sharing the weight of responsibility that comes with being trusted to protect other soldiers' lives. He reminded her that her skills were a gift, but they came with the obligation to use them wisely and only when necessary. Her parents struggled with the reality of their daughter's deployment, but they also expressed pride in her accomplishments. Sarah's mother packed a small photo album filled with pictures from home, while her father gave her a letter to read when she felt homesick. Her younger brother, still in high school, tried to act tough, but couldn't hide his worry about his big sister going to war. The flight to Afghanistan was long and uncomfortable, giving Sarah plenty of time to think about what lay ahead. She had trained extensively for this deployment, but she knew that real combat would be different from any training exercise. The responsibility of potentially holding other soldiers' lives in her hands weighed heavily on her mind. But she also felt confident in her abilities and her training. Her instructors had prepared her well for the challenges ahead. Upon arrival at Bagram Airfield, Sarah was struck by the organized chaos of a major military hub in an active combat zone. Aircraft took off and landed constantly. Convoys moved supplies to forward operating bases, and soldiers from dozens of different units prepared for their own missions. The scale of the American military presence was impressive, but Sarah also understood that much of their work would take place in remote areas where such support would be far away. Sarah's unit was assigned to Forward Operating Base Chapman, located in a mountainous region near several small villages. The base was much smaller than Bagram, with basic facilities and a perimeter defended by concrete barriers and guard towers. The mountains surrounding the base provided excellent vantage points for potential enemy observers, making security a constant concern. Sarah quickly understood why sniper support was considered essential in this environment. Her first few weeks at FOB Chapman involved familiarization with the local area and integration with the other units on the base. Sarah met the Afghan National Army soldiers who would be working alongside American forces. Despite language barriers, she was impressed by their knowledge of the local terrain and their dedication to protecting their communities. Some of the Afghan soldiers had been fighting Taliban insurgents for years and brought valuable experience to their joint operations. The intelligence section briefed Sarah on the current threat situation. Taliban forces in the area were well-armed and experienced, often using improvised explosive devices, ambushes, and long-range attacks against coalition forces. Several recent incidents had involved enemy fighters engaging American positions from distances exceeding 800 meters, taking advantage of the mountainous terrain to shoot, and then quickly disappear. Sarah's role would be to provide counter-sniper capabilities and support for infantry operations in the surrounding villages. Sarah's first combat patrol was a routine security sweep through a village called Kalakutamet, located about 5 kilometers from FOB Chapman. Intelligence reports suggested that Taliban fighters might be using the village to store weapons and plan attacks against coalition forces. Sarah's job was to provide overwatch from a concealed position while infantry soldiers searched specific buildings and spoke with local residents. The patrol moved out before dawn, using night vision equipment to navigate the rocky terrain between the base and the village. Sarah carried her M24 sniper rifle, a precision weapon system capable of accurate fire out to 800 meters and beyond. Her spotter, Sergeant First Class David Kim, carried additional ammunition, a powerful spotting scope, and radio equipment for communicating with the rest of the unit. As the sun rose over the Afghan mountains, Sarah and Sergeant Kim established their overwatch position on a hill overlooking Kalakutamet. The village consisted of traditional mud brick buildings arranged around a central area with a well and a small market. Sarah could see women drawing water and children playing in the dusty streets. It looked peaceful, but intelligence reports suggested that appearances could be deceiving in this region. Through her rifle scope, Sarah observed the infantry soldiers moving through the village below. They moved carefully, checking buildings and speaking with residents through their interpreters. The local people seemed cooperative but wary, which Sarah understood was normal in areas where both coalition forces and Taliban fighters operated. Trust was a fragile commodity in this complex conflict. For 4 hours, Sarah watched over the patrol without incident. The infantry soldiers completed their search without finding any weapons caches or signs of enemy activity. As they prepared to return to base, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anticlimax. Her first combat patrol had been routine, but she understood that this was often the nature of military operations, long periods of careful vigilance punctuated by moments of intense action. On the patrol back to FOB Chapman, Sarah reflected on what she had observed. The village seemed like any small community, with families going about their daily lives despite the ongoing conflict. But she also noticed several positions around the village that would provide excellent cover for enemy fighters. The complex terrain offered numerous hiding places for potential threats. Sarah began to understand why this assignment would require constant alertness and professional expertise. That evening, Sarah wrote her first letter home from Afghanistan. She described the dramatic mountain scenery, the professionalism of her fellow soldiers, and her confidence in their mission. She didn't mention her concerns about the challenges they faced or her growing awareness of how dangerous their environment could become. Her family had enough to worry about without additional details about the threats surrounding their daughter. Over the following weeks, Sarah participated in several more patrols around FOB Chapman. Each mission taught her something new about the area, the enemy, and her role in protecting her fellow soldiers. She learned to read the terrain more effectively, identifying potential threat positions and escape routes that enemy fighters might use. Her partnership with Sergeant Kim became more effective as they developed better communication and learned to work as a team. The turning point came during a mission to the village of Dekhilan, located in a valley 10 kilometers northeast of FOB Chapman. Intelligence reports indicated that Taliban fighters were planning to attack a girls' school in the village, which had recently reopened with coalition support. Sarah's unit was tasked with providing security while Afghan National Army soldiers worked with village elders to assess the threat and develop protective measures. The mission began like previous patrols, with Sarah and Sergeant Kim establishing overwatch positions while infantry soldiers moved through the village. But this time, Sarah noticed several military-age males observing their movements from concealed positions in the surrounding hills. Through her spotting scope, she could see that some of these observers carried weapons and seemed to be coordinating their surveillance of coalition forces. Sarah reported her observations to the patrol leader, who requested permission to extend their mission and gather additional intelligence about potential enemy positions. For the rest of the day, Sarah carefully observed and documented the movements of suspected enemy fighters. She counted at least 15 individuals who appeared to be conducting reconnaissance of coalition positions and routes. As evening approached, the patrol prepared to return to FOB Chapman. But Sarah noticed increased activity among the suspected enemy observers. More fighters were moving into positions that would allow them to attack the patrol during their return journey. The enemy appeared to be planning an ambush along the route back to base. Sarah's training had prepared her for this possibility. Enemy fighters in Afghanistan often allowed coalition patrols to complete their missions in villages, then attack them during the return journey when soldiers might be tired and less alert. The terrain between Dekhilan and FOB Chapman included several areas that would be ideal for such an ambush. The patrol leader, Captain Rodriguez, faced a difficult decision. They could request helicopter support to evacuate the patrol, but weather conditions made flying risky. They could remain in the village overnight, but this would put the residents at risk of Taliban retaliation. Or they could attempt to return to base through terrain that appeared to be under enemy observation. Sarah suggested a fourth option. If she could eliminate some of the enemy observers from her current position, it might disrupt their planned ambush and allow the patrol to return safely. The distances involved would be challenging. Some of the targets were positioned more than 700 meters from her location. But Sarah felt confident in her abilities and her equipment. Captain Rodriguez considered Sarah's proposal carefully. Authorizing sniper engagement would initiate combat operations that could escalate quickly. But intelligence reports suggested that the enemy fighters posed a legitimate threat not just to the current patrol, but to future operations in the area and to the village residents who had cooperated with coalition forces. The decision to authorize Sarah's engagement would prove to be one of the most significant moments of her deployment, setting in motion events that would test her training, her courage, and her commitment to protecting innocent lives. As the sun began to set over the Afghan mountains, Sarah prepared for what would become the most important shots of her career. The radio crackled with Captain Rodriguez's voice. "Overwatch, you are cleared to engage. Take the shot." Sarah steadied her breathing as she adjusted her rifle position on the rocky outcrop overlooking the valley below. The wind had picked up as the sun began to set, creating additional challenges for the long-range shots she was about to attempt. Through her powerful scope, she could see 3 enemy fighters positioned behind a stone wall approximately 650 meters away. They were armed with AK-47 rifles and appeared to be waiting for the coalition patrol to enter what would become a deadly ambush zone. Sergeant Kim lay beside her, using his spotting scope to provide detailed wind readings and range confirmations. His calm voice came through her earpiece as he relayed critical information. Wind is 3 to 4 miles per hour, left to right. Range to primary target is 647 meters. You've got clear sight lines to all 3 positions. Sarah had practiced shots at this distance hundreds of times during training, but this was different. These weren't paper targets or training scenarios. The success or failure of her next few shots would determine whether her fellow soldiers made it home safely that night. The responsibility was immense, but Sarah felt the familiar calm that came with focusing on the technical aspects of precision shooting. She adjusted her scope for the distance and wind conditions, drawing on months of training and the wisdom her grandfather had shared with her about reading environmental conditions. The mountain air was thin at this altitude, which meant her bullets would fly slightly differently than they would at sea level. Sarah had practiced these calculations countless times, but real-world conditions always presented unique challenges. The first target was a Taliban fighter positioned behind a low stone wall, with only his head and shoulders visible above the barrier. Sarah could see him through her scope, scanning the valley below with binoculars while speaking into what appeared to be a handheld radio. He was likely coordinating the ambush with other fighters positioned along the patrol's planned return route. Sarah controlled her breathing, allowing her heart rate to slow as she prepared for the shot. Her instructors had taught her that successful sniping was as much about mental control as it was about marksmanship. The ability to remain calm under pressure, to block out distractions, and to execute the fundamentals perfectly when lives depended on it. These were the qualities that separated competent soldiers from exceptional snipers. Through her scope, Sarah could see the target's face clearly. He appeared to be a young man, possibly in his early 20s, with a dark beard and intense eyes. For a moment, Sarah felt the weight of what she was about to do. This was someone's son, perhaps someone's brother or father. But her training kicked in, reminding her that this individual was actively planning to kill American soldiers and Afghan allies who were risking their lives to protect innocent civilians. Sarah placed the crosshairs of her scope precisely on the target's upper torso, adjusting slightly for the wind drift she had calculated. She took a deep breath, released half of it, and then held her breath as she applied steady pressure to the trigger. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding mountains. Through her scope, Sarah saw the target fall immediately. The shot had been precise, eliminating the threat without giving the enemy fighter any opportunity to alert his companions or return fire. Sergeant Kim confirmed the hit through his spotting scope, while Sarah quickly adjusted her aim toward the second target position. The second enemy fighter was located approximately 580 meters away, positioned behind a large boulder that provided excellent cover from most angles. But from Sarah's elevated position, she had a clear view of the space where the fighter would need to expose himself to observe the valley below. Sarah waited patiently, knowing that the sound of her first shot would likely cause the remaining fighters to move or investigate. Sure enough, the second target emerged from behind his cover, apparently trying to locate the source of the gunfire that had eliminated his companion. Sarah had her crosshairs ready when he appeared, and she took the shot without hesitation. The bullet found its mark, and the second threat was neutralized. The third enemy position was the most challenging. The fighter was positioned approximately 720 meters away, partially concealed in a cluster of rocks and scrub vegetation. Sarah could see movement in the area, but getting a clear shot would require patience and precision. The distance was near the maximum effective range of her rifle system, requiring perfect calculation of all environmental factors. Sergeant Kim provided updated wind readings as Sarah studied the target area through her scope. The enemy fighter was being more cautious now, having apparently realized that his companions had been eliminated by a sniper. He was staying low and moving only when necessary, making him a much more difficult target to acquire. For several minutes, Sarah waited for the right opportunity. Sniper training had emphasized the importance of patience, the willingness to wait for the perfect shot rather than taking marginal opportunities that might result in missed shots and compromised positions. Sarah knew that revealing her position with an unsuccessful shot could put the entire patrol at risk. Finally, the target made a critical error. He rose up to scan the patrol's position in the valley, exposing enough of his torso to provide Sarah with a viable target. The range was long, the wind conditions were tricky, and the light was fading as the sun set behind the mountains. But Sarah's training and natural abilities came together in a moment of perfect execution. She adjusted her aim point to compensate for the bullet drop at that distance, calculated the wind drift, and took the shot. Through her scope, she watched the bullet's trace as it arced across the valley. After what seemed like an eternity, but was actually less than 2 seconds, the target fell. The third threat had been eliminated. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the radio immediately. Outstanding shooting, Overwatch. You've cleared the immediate threat. Patrol is moving to alternate route back to base. But Sarah's work wasn't finished. As the patrol began their movement back toward FOB Chapman, new threats began to emerge. Sarah observed additional enemy fighters moving into positions along alternative routes. The Taliban forces in the area were well organized and had apparently prepared multiple contingency plans for attacking coalition forces. Through her scope, Sarah counted at least 6 more armed individuals moving through the terrain between the patrol's position and their base. Some were carrying automatic weapons, while others appeared to have rocket-propelled grenades or other heavy weapons. The enemy was adapting to the elimination of their initial ambush positions, but they hadn't given up on their plan to attack the coalition patrol. Sarah realized that her initial success had only bought temporary safety for her fellow soldiers. The enemy was regrouping and attempting to establish new attack positions. She would need to continue engaging targets to keep the patrol's route clear, but her ammunition was limited and the distances were increasing as the enemy fighters positioned themselves further away. Sergeant Kim was monitoring multiple radio frequencies, coordinating with the patrol leader, and gathering intelligence about enemy movements from other observation posts in the area. His reports painted a picture of a complex tactical situation where enemy fighters were attempting to surround the coalition patrol using the mountainous terrain to their advantage. We've got movement on the ridge line to the north, Sergeant Kim reported. Range approximately 800 meters. Multiple targets with heavy weapons. Sarah adjusted her position to engage the new threats, but the distances involved were pushing the limits of her rifle system's effective range. At 800 meters, environmental factors like wind and air density became critically important. Small errors in calculation could result in missed shots, and she was running low on ammunition. The patrol below was moving as quickly as possible while maintaining security, but the terrain limited their speed. The rocky ground and steep slopes made rapid movement difficult, especially while carrying their equipment and maintaining vigilance for additional threats. Every minute they remained in the area increased their risk of being engaged by enemy forces. Sarah's fourth shot of the evening was aimed at an enemy fighter positioned on a ridge approximately 785 meters away. The target was setting up what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, a weapon that could devastate the patrol if successfully employed. The shot was at the extreme range of Sarah's capabilities, requiring perfect execution of all fundamentals. She took extra time to calculate the ballistics, accounting for the increased bullet drop at that distance, and the wind conditions that had become more complex as the sun set and air currents shifted in the mountain valleys. Sarah controlled her breathing, steadied her rifle, and took the shot with complete confidence in her training and abilities. The bullet traveled for nearly 3 seconds before reaching its target. Sarah watched through her scope as the enemy fighter fell, his weapon clattering down the rocky slope. The threat to the patrol had been eliminated, but Sarah knew that more enemies were likely moving into position as darkness approached. The fading light was creating additional challenges for observation and target identification. Sarah's scope was equipped with excellent optics, but the growing shadows and changing light conditions made it more difficult to distinguish between enemy fighters and innocent civilians who might be in the area. The rules of engagement required positive identification of threats before engaging, adding an extra layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. As the patrol continued their movement toward FOB Chapman, Sarah maintained her overwatch position and continued scanning for threats. Her success in eliminating the initial ambush had disrupted the enemy's plans, but she knew that Taliban fighters were persistent and resourceful. They would likely continue attempting to attack the patrol until it reached the safety of the base perimeter. Sergeant Kim received updates from intelligence sources indicating that enemy communications had been intercepted. The Taliban fighters were frustrated by the elimination of their initial positions and were calling for reinforcements from other areas. Sarah's effectiveness had apparently surprised them, and they were adapting their tactics to deal with the sniper threat. "They're bringing in more fighters from the east," Sergeant Kim reported. "Intelligence estimates at least 20 additional combatants moving toward our area of operations." Sarah understood that she and Sergeant Kim were now facing a much larger enemy force than initially anticipated. Their position provided excellent fields of fire, but it would also become increasingly dangerous as more enemy fighters moved into the area. They might need to consider relocating to maintain their effectiveness while avoiding being overrun. The patrol below had covered about half the distance back to FOB Chapman when Sarah observed a new threat developing. A group of enemy fighters was moving into position to attack the patrol from a flanking position that would be difficult for the ground forces to detect or engage. The enemy was using a dried riverbed to conceal their movement, approaching from an angle that the patrol's security elements couldn't effectively cover. This new threat was located approximately 920 meters from Sarah's position, beyond the normal effective range of her rifle system. Engaging targets at that distance would require exceptional skill, perfect conditions, and a considerable amount of luck. But Sarah realized that if she didn't attempt to stop this flanking attack, the patrol would likely suffer casualties when they were ambushed from an unexpected direction. Sarah discussed the situation with Sergeant Kim, who confirmed the range and provided detailed wind readings for the extended shot. The conditions were challenging but not impossible. The wind had died down somewhat as evening approached, which would help with accuracy at the extended range. Sarah would need to aim significantly higher to compensate for bullet drop at nearly 1,000 meters. She had practiced shots at similar distances during advanced training, but never in combat conditions with lives depending on the outcome. Sarah took several minutes to calculate the precise aim point, accounting for all environmental factors and the ballistic characteristics of her ammunition. She adjusted her scope to its maximum elevation setting and prepared for what would be the longest shot of her career. Through her scope, Sarah could see the lead enemy fighter in the flanking group. He was carrying an automatic weapon and appeared to be directing the movement of the other fighters. Eliminating him would likely disrupt their coordinated attack and buy additional time for the patrol to reach safety. Sarah controlled her breathing and steadied her rifle as she had been trained to do countless times before. But this shot felt different. The distance was extreme, the consequences of failure were severe, and she was pushing the limits of both her equipment and her abilities. Everything she had learned about precision shooting would need to come together perfectly. She squeezed the trigger smoothly, following through with her shooting fundamentals even as the rifle recoiled. The bullet's flight time at that distance would be nearly 4 seconds, giving Sarah time to observe its path through her scope. She watched the trace arc high over the valley before beginning its descent toward the target area. The shot was successful, eliminating the lead fighter and causing confusion among his companions. But Sarah knew that one shot wouldn't stop the entire flanking attack. She would need to continue engaging targets at extended range while the patrol completed their movement to safety. The most challenging part of her mission was just beginning. As darkness continued to fall over the Afghan mountains, Sarah prepared for what would become a legendary display of precision shooting. The patrol's survival would depend on her ability to engage multiple targets at extreme ranges while enemy forces attempted to coordinate attacks from positions throughout the surrounding terrain. Her training, her equipment, and her courage would all be tested to their limits in the hours ahead. The radio crackled with an urgent message from Captain Rodriguez. "Overwatch, we're seeing movement from multiple directions. Unknown number of enemy fighters converging on our position." We're going to need continuous fire support to make it back to base. Sarah acknowledged the transmission and began scanning for new targets. The real test of her abilities as a sniper was about to begin. The valley had transformed into a deadly chess game as darkness settled over the Afghan mountains. Sarah could see muzzle flashes appearing at various points throughout the terrain as enemy fighters began engaging the patrol from multiple positions. The coordinated attack that the Taliban had planned was now unfolding, but with modifications to account for the sniper threat that had already eliminated several key positions. Through her night vision scope, Sarah counted at least 12 different firing positions where enemy fighters had set up to attack the patrol. The distances ranged from 400 to over 1,000 meters from her position, creating a complex tactical problem that would require precise prioritization of threats. Each decision about which target to engage first could mean the difference between life and death for the soldiers below. Sergeant Kim was working frantically to coordinate with multiple radio frequencies, gathering intelligence from drone surveillance, other observation posts, and the patrol itself. His reports painted a picture of an enemy force that was larger and better organized than initial intelligence had suggested. The Taliban fighters were using sophisticated tactics, with some elements providing covering fire while others maneuvered to more advantageous positions. "Sarah, we've got priority targets at your 2 o'clock, Sergeant Kim called out. Range 650 meters. 2 fighters with what appears to be a heavy machine gun. Sarah swiveled her rifle toward the indicated position and quickly acquired the targets through her scope. The enemy fighters were indeed setting up a heavy weapon system that could devastate the patrol if it became operational. The 2 men were working efficiently to assemble their weapon, apparently confident that their position provided adequate cover from ground-based return fire. Sarah took the shot at the first target without hesitation, eliminating him before he could complete the weapon setup. The second fighter immediately dropped behind cover, but Sarah maintained her aim on the position. When he emerged several seconds later to attempt to continue assembling the weapon, Sarah was ready with her follow-up shot. Both threats were eliminated before the heavy machine gun could be brought into action. But eliminating 2 targets had revealed Sarah's position to other enemy fighters in the area. Almost immediately, she began receiving incoming fire from multiple directions. Bullets struck the rocks around her position, sending fragments flying and forcing both Sarah and Sergeant Kim to take cover behind the limited protection their observation post provided. "We're taking fire from at least 4 different positions," Sergeant Kim reported over the radio. "Request immediate air support if available." The response from headquarters was not encouraging. Weather conditions had deteriorated, preventing helicopter gunships from providing close air support. A drone was monitoring the area and providing intelligence, but it wasn't armed and couldn't engage the enemy fighters directly. Sarah and Sergeant Kim were on their own, with limited ammunition and an increasing number of enemy threats converging on their position. Sarah realized that staying in their current position was becoming untenable. The enemy had identified her location and was beginning to coordinate fire from multiple directions. But moving to a new position would take time and would temporarily reduce her ability to provide overwatch for the patrol below. She faced a difficult decision between her own safety and her mission to protect her fellow soldiers. The patrol was still approximately 3 kilometers from FOB Chapman, moving through terrain that offered numerous opportunities for enemy ambushes. Captain Rodriguez was pushing his soldiers to move as quickly as possible while maintaining security, but the rocky ground and steep slopes limited their speed. Every minute they remained in the valley increased their vulnerability to enemy attack. Sarah made the decision to remain in position for as long as possible, accepting the personal risk in order to continue providing fire support for the patrol. She knew that her accurate shooting had already saved lives by disrupting the planned ambushes, and she was determined to continue protecting her fellow soldiers regardless of the danger to herself. "Kim, I'm going to continue engaging targets from here," Sarah announced. "If the incoming fire gets too heavy, we'll displace to the alternate position we identified earlier." Sergeant Kim nodded grimly, understanding the risk they were accepting. He continued monitoring the radio frequencies and providing Sarah with target information while occasionally returning fire with his own rifle when enemy positions came within range. Sarah's next priority target was located approximately 780 meters away, positioned on a rocky outcrop that provided excellent observation of the patrol's route. The enemy fighter appeared to be directing other elements, using hand signals and radio communications to coordinate the ongoing attack. Eliminating him would likely disrupt the enemy's command and control capabilities. The shot was challenging due to the distance and the fact that the target was partially concealed behind rocks. Sarah had to wait for the right moment when enough of the target was exposed to ensure a successful hit. When the opportunity came, she took the shot with confidence, watching through her scope as the enemy commander fell. The elimination of the apparent leader caused visible confusion among the other enemy fighters. Several positions stopped firing temporarily, apparently waiting for new orders or trying to understand what had happened to their commander. Sarah used this brief lull to engage two more targets at medium range, further disrupting the coordinated attack. But the respite was temporary. The enemy fighters quickly adapted to the loss of their leader, with someone else apparently taking command and reorganizing their attack. New firing positions began engaging the patrol from different angles, and Sarah could see additional fighters moving through the terrain to establish flanking positions. Through her scope, Sarah observed a particularly troubling development. A group of enemy fighters was moving into position to establish a roadblock along the patrol's planned route to FOB Chapman. If successful, this would force the patrol to take an alternate route that would expose them to additional ambushes and significantly delay their return to base. The fighters establishing the roadblock were approximately 1,100 meters from Sarah's position, well beyond the normal effective range of her rifle system. But Sarah realized that if she could eliminate the key personnel setting up the roadblock, she might be able to prevent the patrol from being forced into an even more dangerous situation. Sergeant Kim confirmed the extreme range and provided detailed environmental readings. The wind conditions had become more complex as the temperature dropped with nightfall, creating shifting air currents that would affect bullet trajectory at long range. Sarah would need to make precise calculations and execute perfect shooting fundamentals to have any chance of success at that distance. Sarah took several minutes to study the target area and calculate the required aim point. At 1,100 meters, the bullet drop would be significant, requiring her to aim well above the target to compensate for gravity's effect on the projectile. The wind drift would also be substantial, requiring careful observation of environmental indicators to estimate the correct hold. Through her scope, Sarah could see the enemy fighters working to position obstacles across the road. They appeared confident that they were too far away to be engaged effectively by coalition forces, focusing on their task rather than maintaining vigilance for threats. This overconfidence would prove to be a critical error. Sarah selected the fighter who appeared to be directing the roadblock operation as her primary target. Eliminating him would likely disrupt their coordination and buy time for the patrol to pass through the area before the roadblock could be completed. The shot would require everything Sarah had learned about long-range precision shooting. She controlled her breathing and steadied her rifle, drawing on months of training and the wisdom her grandfather had shared about reading wind and environmental conditions. The crosshairs of her scope were aimed high above the target to compensate for bullet drop, with additional adjustment for the estimated wind drift. Sarah squeezed the trigger smoothly and followed through with her shooting fundamentals, watching the bullet's trace as it arced across the valley. The flight time at that distance was nearly 5 seconds, giving her ample opportunity to observe the projectile's path and pray that her calculations had been correct. The bullet found its mark, eliminating the target and causing immediate confusion among the other fighters at the roadblock position. Sarah quickly adjusted her aim toward a second target in the group, taking advantage of their momentary disorganization to attempt another long-range shot. Her second shot at the extended range was also successful, eliminating another key figure in the roadblock operation. The remaining enemy fighters abandoned their positions and scattered, apparently unwilling to continue their mission in the face of accurate sniper fire from such an extreme distance. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the radio with obvious relief. "Outstanding shooting, Overwatch. The route is clear, and we're moving through now. Your fire support has been critical to our survival tonight." But Sarah's mission was far from over. Intelligence reports indicated that additional enemy forces were still moving into the area, attempting to establish new ambush positions along the patrol's remaining route to FOB Chapman. The Taliban fighters were persistent and resourceful, continuing to adapt their tactics despite the heavy losses they had suffered. As the patrol moved through the area where the roadblock had been prevented, Sarah began engaging new targets that emerged from concealment. Her ammunition supply was running low, forcing her to make every shot count. Each engagement had to be precisely calculated to ensure that limited rounds were used to maximum effect. Sarah's reputation for accuracy had apparently spread among the enemy forces, creating a psychological effect that went beyond the physical casualties she had inflicted. Enemy fighters were becoming more cautious, staying in covered positions longer, and being more careful about exposing themselves. This increased caution was slowing their ability to coordinate attacks and providing additional protection for the patrol. Sergeant Kim reported that intercepted enemy communications indicated growing frustration among Taliban commanders. They had apparently expected to achieve easy success against what they believed would be a routine coalition patrol. Instead, they were facing a sniper whose accuracy was disrupting all of their planned operations. "They're calling you the ghost shooter," Sergeant Kim reported with a grim smile. Apparently, they can't figure out how one person is engaging targets at such long ranges. Sarah allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction at the compliment, but she remained focused on her mission. The patrol was still vulnerable, and her ammunition was limited. She needed to make strategic decisions about which threats to engage and which to monitor, conserving her remaining rounds for the most critical moments. A new threat emerged as the patrol approached a narrow valley that provided the most direct route back to FOB Chapman. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves on the high ground on both sides of the valley, creating a potential crossfire that could devastate the patrol as they moved through the confined space. Sarah could see at least 8 different fighting positions, with more likely concealed in areas she couldn't observe. The tactical situation presented Sarah with her most challenging decision of the night. She had enough ammunition to engage perhaps 4 or 5 more targets, but there were clearly more threats than she could eliminate with her remaining rounds. She would need to select the most dangerous positions and hope that eliminating key targets would disrupt the entire ambush. Sarah studied the enemy positions carefully, identifying which fighters appeared to have the best fields of fire and the heaviest weapons. 2 positions held what appeared to be rocket-propelled grenades, weapons that could destroy vehicles or kill multiple soldiers with single shots. These became her priority targets. The first RPG position was located approximately 680 meters from Sarah's location, positioned behind a rock formation that provided excellent cover. Sarah waited patiently for the gunner to expose himself sufficiently to provide a clear shot. When the opportunity came, she eliminated the threat with a precise shot that sent the enemy weapon tumbling down the rocky slope. The second RPG position was at a similar range, but on the opposite side of the valley. Sarah quickly adjusted her aim and eliminated that threat as well, removing the enemy's most dangerous weapons from the equation. But she knew that multiple automatic weapons positions remained active, still capable of inflicting serious casualties on the patrol. Captain Rodriguez made the decision to move the patrol through the valley as quickly as possible, accepting the risk of the remaining enemy positions rather than attempting to find an alternate route that might expose them to additional threats. Sarah provided covering fire as the soldiers below moved through the dangerous terrain, engaging targets of opportunity when they presented themselves. The patrol's movement through the valley became a running firefight, with enemy positions engaging the soldiers from multiple directions while Sarah attempted to neutralize the most dangerous threats. Her remaining ammunition was precious, forcing her to make split-second decisions about which targets represented the greatest immediate danger. As the patrol neared the exit of the valley, Sarah observed one final threat that would require her most challenging shot of the night. An enemy fighter had positioned himself on a ridge approximately 950 meters away, armed with what appeared to be a powerful sniper rifle of his own. He was taking careful aim at the patrol below, preparing to engage coalition soldiers who had no cover from his elevated position. Sarah realized that this enemy sniper represented a threat that she alone could neutralize. The distance was extreme, the light conditions were poor, and she was down to her last few rounds. But if she didn't take the shot, American soldiers would likely die in the next few seconds. She made the rapid calculations required for the extended shot, estimating wind drift and bullet drop while tracking the enemy sniper's movements through her scope. When he settled into his shooting position and began to aim at the patrol below, Sarah was ready. The shot would become legendary among those who witnessed it. A precision strike at nearly 1,000 meters in low light conditions that eliminated a threat just seconds before he could engage coalition forces. Sarah's bullet found its target with deadly accuracy, ending the immediate threat to the patrol and clearing the way for their safe return to base. As the patrol finally reached the perimeter of FOB Chapman, Sarah and Sergeant Kim began their own movement back to base. They had successfully protected their fellow soldiers through a complex and dangerous engagement. But Sarah knew that the most challenging part of her mission was yet to come. The events of this night would establish her reputation as one of the Army's most effective snipers, but they would also paint a target on her back for future enemy operations. 3 weeks after the Valley engagement, Sarah had become something of a legend at FOB Chapman. Word of her precision shooting had spread throughout the coalition forces in the region, and enemy communications intercepted by intelligence units revealed that Taliban fighters were actively discussing the American woman sniper who had disrupted their operations. But this newfound reputation would soon present Sarah with her greatest challenge yet. Captain Rodriguez called Sarah into the Tactical Operations Center early one morning, his expression grave as he spread aerial photographs across the briefing table. The images showed a village called Marjikillan, located in a remote valley approximately 15 kilometers northeast of their base. Intelligence reports indicated that Taliban forces had taken control of the village and were using it as a staging area for attacks against coalition forces and Afghan government targets. "We've got a serious problem," Captain Rodriguez began. "Taliban forces have occupied this village and are holding approximately 200 civilians hostage. They're using the civilian presence to shield themselves from airstrikes and are planning to execute the village elders who have been cooperating with coalition forces." The intelligence briefing painted a disturbing picture. Taliban commanders had moved into Marjikillan 3 days earlier, bringing with them a substantial force of experienced fighters. They had immediately seized control of key buildings in the village center and gathered the civilian population in a central area where they could be easily controlled. Several village elders who had worked with coalition forces to improve security and infrastructure in the region had been identified and were being held separately, awaiting execution. Sarah studied the aerial photographs carefully, noting the layout of the village and the positions where enemy forces had established their control. The Taliban had chosen their location well. The village was surrounded by high ground that would make any ground assault extremely costly, while the presence of civilians made airstrikes impossible without causing unacceptable collateral damage. "What's the mission?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Captain Rodriguez pointed to a building in the center of the village that intelligence had identified as the Taliban command post. "We need to eliminate the enemy leadership and create enough confusion to allow a rescue operation to extract the hostages. The problem is that the command post is located over 2,900 meters from the nearest position where we can establish overwatch." Sarah felt her breath catch as she processed the distance. Nearly 3 kilometers, almost double the range of her longest successful shot during the Valley engagement. At that distance, environmental factors like wind, air density, and temperature would have enormous effects on bullet trajectory. The shot would be at the very edge of what was theoretically possible with her rifle system. "Sir, that's an extremely long shot," Sarah said carefully. "Beyond the normal effective range of the M24 system." "We know," Captain Rodriguez replied. "But intelligence believes that eliminating the Taliban commander could cause enough confusion among his fighters to create an opportunity for a helicopter assault to rescue the hostages. You're the only sniper in the region with the skills to attempt this shot." The tactical situation was complex. A joint coalition and Afghan National Army force would position themselves to assault the village once Sarah eliminated the primary target. Helicopter units would be standing by to evacuate hostages and provide additional fire support if needed. But The entire operation hinged on Sarah's ability to make an impossible shot under combat conditions. Sarah requested additional time to study the intelligence and plan her approach. The target building was located in the center of the village, with the Taliban commander reportedly using the second floor as his observation post. From that position, he could direct the activities of his fighters while maintaining visual contact with the hostages in the village center. The shooting position would be located on a ridgeline that provided a clear line of sight to the target area. But the extreme distance meant that even small errors in calculation or execution could result in complete misses or, worse, accidental harm to innocent civilians. Sarah would need to account for bullet drop of more than 30 feet at that range, as well as wind drift that could push her bullet several feet off target. Sergeant Kim would accompany Sarah to provide spotting support and communications with the assault force. But at the extreme range involved, even his powerful spotting scope would be challenged to observe the target area clearly. They would be operating at the limits of their equipment capabilities as well as their personal skills. The weapon system for this mission would be a specialized version of the M24 rifle equipped with enhanced optics and match-grade ammunition. The bullets were specifically manufactured for long-range precision shooting, with consistent weight and ballistic characteristics that would improve accuracy at extended distances. But even with the best equipment available, success would depend primarily on Sarah's skill and experience. Sarah spent the next day studying weather patterns in the target area, learning about wind conditions and temperature variations that might affect her shot. She practiced extensively with the modified rifle system, familiarizing herself with its characteristics and confirming her zero at various ranges. Every aspect of her preparation would need to be perfect for the mission to succeed. The night before the operation, Sarah called her grandfather using the base's satellite phone system. She couldn't discuss the specific details of her upcoming mission, but she needed to hear his voice and draw on the wisdom he had shared with her over the years. Their conversation was brief, but his steady confidence in her abilities helped calm her nerves about the unprecedented challenge she would face the next day. Mija, remember that shooting is about patience and respect, her grandfather told her. You have the skills and the training. Trust in yourself and do what needs to be done. Sarah and Sergeant Kim departed FOB Chapman before dawn, moving through the mountainous terrain toward their designated shooting position. The movement took several hours, as they had to avoid known enemy positions and traverse difficult rocky ground while carrying their equipment and ammunition. The modified rifle system was heavier than Sarah's normal weapon, adding to the physical challenge of reaching their position. As the sun rose over the Afghan mountains, Sarah and Sergeant Kim established their position on the ridgeline overlooking Marjikhalan. Through her powerful scope, Sarah could see the village spread out in the valley below, with Taliban fighters visible in various positions throughout the settlement. The distance to the target building was even more intimidating when viewed through the scope. The command post appeared impossibly small and distant. Sergeant Kim used his laser rangefinder to confirm the exact distance to the target, 2,847 meters. The measurement was slightly less than the initial estimate, but still far beyond the normal effective range of any sniper rifle system. Sarah began her calculations, accounting for the extreme bullet drop, wind conditions, air density at the high altitude, and temperature effects on her ammunition. The environmental conditions were challenging, but manageable. Wind speed was moderate, but shifting direction periodically, requiring constant observation and adjustment. The thin mountain air would cause her bullet to fly slightly differently than at sea level, while the morning temperature would affect the ballistic characteristics of her ammunition. Sarah had practiced these calculations extensively, but never under such extreme conditions. Through her scope, Sarah observed the target building carefully. Taliban fighters were visible on the roof and around the perimeter, but the commander himself remained inside the structure. Intelligence reports suggested that he typically appeared on the second-floor balcony during morning hours to observe his fighters and the hostage population. Sarah would need to wait for that opportunity while remaining hidden from enemy observation. The waiting was perhaps the most difficult part of the mission. Sarah lay motionless behind her rifle for more than 2 hours, occasionally adjusting her position slightly to account for changing light conditions or wind patterns. Sergeant Kim monitored radio communications and provided updates on the status of the assault force, which was positioning itself several kilometers away while waiting for Sarah's signal. Finally, movement appeared on the target building's balcony. Through her scope, Sarah could see a figure emerging from the interior. A tall man, wearing traditional Afghan clothing with what appeared to be military equipment. Intelligence had described the Taliban commander as having a distinctive appearance, and the figure on the balcony matched those descriptions precisely. Sarah made her final calculations, adjusting for the current wind conditions and confirming her aim point. At 2,847 meters, she would need to aim approximately 40 feet above her target to account for bullet drop, while also adjusting several feet to the left to compensate for wind drift. The precise calculations required intense concentration and absolute confidence in her abilities. Range confirmed at 2,847 meters, Sergeant Kim reported quietly. Wind is steady at 8 miles per hour from the southwest. Target is stationary on the balcony. Sarah controlled her breathing and settled into her shooting position. Everything she had learned about precision shooting, every hour of practice, every lesson from her grandfather about patience and respect, it all came together in this moment. The crosshairs of her scope were positioned high above the target, adjusted for the extreme range and environmental conditions. Through her scope, Sarah could see the Taliban commander clearly. He appeared to be surveying his positions in the village, confident that his elevated position and the distance from coalition forces provided complete security. He had no way of knowing that an American sniper was preparing to engage him from nearly 3 kilometers away. Sarah took a deep breath, released half of it, and held the remainder as she applied steady pressure to the trigger. The rifle fired with its characteristic crack, and Sarah watched through her scope as the bullet began its long journey across the valley. At the extreme range, the bullet's flight time would be more than 4 seconds, giving Sarah time to observe its entire trajectory. The bullet arced high over the valley, following the precise path that Sarah's calculations had predicted. She watched through her scope as it reached the apex of its trajectory and began its descent toward the target area. The mathematics of ballistics, the physics of projectile motion, and Sarah's years of training all combined in a single moment of extraordinary precision. The bullet struck the Taliban commander's center mass, eliminating him instantly and creating immediate confusion among the fighters in the village below. Sarah's shot had been successful, a precision strike at 2,847 meters that would later be confirmed as one of the longest successful sniper engagements in military history. Target down, Sergeant Kim confirmed through his spotting scope. Assault forces cleared to begin the operation. The elimination of the Taliban commander created exactly the confusion that mission planners had hoped for. Enemy fighters throughout the village began moving erratically, apparently unsure of who was now in command or what their orders should be. Some fighters began moving toward the command post to investigate what had happened, while others maintained their positions but with obvious uncertainty about their situation. The coalition assault force took advantage of this confusion to begin their helicopter-borne assault on the village. Attack helicopters provided suppressive fire while transport aircraft moved to extract the hostages from their confined positions. The precise timing of the operation had been designed to maximize the psychological impact of Sarah's shot while minimizing the enemy's ability to respond effectively. Sarah continued to provide overwatch as the rescue operation unfolded below. Her remaining ammunition allowed her to engage additional targets of opportunity, further disrupting the enemy's attempts to coordinate their response to the assault. Several Taliban fighters who attempted to move heavy weapons into position to engage the helicopters were eliminated by follow-up shots from Sarah's position. The rescue operation was completed successfully within 30 minutes of Sarah's initial shot. All hostages were evacuated safely, with the village elders who had been scheduled for execution rescued from their captivity. Coalition casualties were minimal, with only minor injuries sustained during the helicopter assault. The Taliban force in the village was either eliminated or scattered, ending their use of Marjikalan as a staging area for attacks. As Sarah and Sergeant Kim prepared to withdraw from their position, they received congratulations from the assault force commander and confirmation that the mission had been completely successful. Sarah's record-breaking shot had not only eliminated a high-value target but had also saved the lives of 200 innocent civilians who had been held hostage by Taliban forces. The return journey to FOB Chapman was made in daylight, with helicopter escort providing security for the sniper team that had made the operation possible. Sarah carried her rifle with a sense of accomplishment that went beyond personal achievement. She had used her skills to protect innocent lives and strike a significant blow against enemy forces that threatened the security of the region. But Sarah also understood that her success would make her an even higher priority target for Taliban forces in the area. Word of the record-breaking shot would spread quickly through enemy communication networks, and they would likely begin planning operations specifically designed to eliminate the American sniper who had proven so effective against their forces. The real test of her abilities might still be ahead. News of Sarah's record-breaking 2,847-meter shot spread through military channels within hours of the successful hostage rescue operation. The precision strike that had eliminated the Taliban commander and saved 200 innocent lives became the subject of detailed after-action reports, intelligence analyses, and tactical studies. But, for Sarah, the immediate consequence was a dramatic increase in the danger she faced every time she left FOB Chapman. Intercepted enemy communications revealed that Taliban forces throughout the region had placed a substantial bounty on the ghost sniper who had demonstrated such devastating effectiveness against their operations. Enemy fighters were actively seeking information about Sarah's identity, location, and operational patterns. The psychological impact of her success had apparently shaken Taliban confidence in their ability to operate freely in areas where coalition snipers might be positioned. Colonel Mitchell, the regional task force commander, flew to FOB Chapman 3 days after the hostage rescue to personally debrief Sarah and assess the broader implications of her success. The meeting took place in the base's secure conference room, with only Captain Rodriguez, Sergeant Kim, and a few senior intelligence officers present. The colonel's expression was serious as he reviewed the classified reports documenting Sarah's achievements over the past month. Staff Sergeant Martinez, your performance over the past several weeks has been truly exceptional, Colonel Mitchell began. The precision shooting you've demonstrated has not only saved American lives, but has significantly disrupted enemy operations throughout this sector. Sarah appreciated the recognition, but she was more interested in understanding how her success might affect future missions and the safety of her fellow soldiers. The attention her achievements had generated made her uncomfortable, especially given the increased security threats that came with her newfound reputation among enemy forces. The colonel explained that intelligence analysts had documented a measurable change in Taliban operational patterns following Sarah's successful engagements. Enemy forces were avoiding areas where they might be vulnerable to long-range sniper fire, altering their movement patterns, and investing significant resources in trying to locate and eliminate the coalition sniper who had proven so effective against them. The problem we face now is that your success has made you a high-value target, Colonel Mitchell continued. We've intercepted communications indicating that Taliban commanders are planning specific operations aimed at eliminating you. They see you as a significant threat to their operational capabilities in this region. The briefing included detailed intelligence about enemy efforts to counter Sarah's effectiveness. Taliban forces had brought in several experienced snipers from other regions, apparently hoping to engage Sarah in long-range duels. They had also increased their surveillance activities around FOB Chapman, attempting to identify patterns in coalition sniper operations that might help them predict when and where Sarah would deploy. Captain Rodriguez expressed concern about the increased risk to Sarah and the potential impact on other coalition operations in the region. If enemy forces were dedicating substantial resources to hunting one American sniper, it suggested that Sarah's effectiveness had exceeded normal tactical impact and was approaching strategic significance. This level of enemy attention could complicate future missions and put additional soldiers at risk. Colonel Mitchell had arrived at FOB Chapman with a specific proposal. Higher Headquarters was offering Sarah the opportunity to transfer to a specialized unit that conducted deep reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines. The assignment would take advantage of her exceptional marksmanship skills while potentially reducing her exposure to the focused enemy attention she was currently receiving in the FOB Chapman area of operations. The new unit, designated as a long-range surveillance team, would conduct missions throughout Afghanistan, providing precision shooting support for special operations forces and gathering intelligence in remote areas where conventional units rarely operated. The work would be more dangerous in some respects, but it would also be more varied and might prevent enemy forces from developing specific countermeasures against her operations. Sarah requested time to consider the offer, understanding that it represented a significant change in her military career. The specialized unit would provide opportunities for professional development and would allow her to work with some of the Army's most elite soldiers. But it would also mean leaving the team she had worked with so effectively and adapting to new operational procedures and tactics. Sergeant Kim, who had served as Sarah's spotter throughout her recent successes, was also being considered for the specialized unit. Their partnership had proven exceptionally effective, and military leadership recognized the value of keeping successful sniper teams together. The decision about transferring would ultimately be Sarah's, but she wouldn't have to make the transition alone. That evening, Sarah walked the perimeter of FOB Chapman, thinking about the choices she faced. The base had become her home over the past several months, and the soldiers she served with had become like family. Leaving would be difficult, but she also understood that her continued presence might put them at additional risk if enemy forces launched operations specifically aimed at eliminating her. The decision was made easier the next morning when intelligence reports indicated that Taliban forces were planning a major assault on FOB Chapman, apparently hoping to overrun the base and capture or kill the American sniper who had caused them so much trouble. The attack was scheduled for the following week and would involve more than 200 enemy fighters, supported by heavy weapons and coordinated assault teams. Colonel Mitchell made the decision to evacuate Sarah and Sergeant Kim immediately, both to protect them from the planned assault and to deny the enemy their primary objective. A helicopter would extract them that afternoon, taking them to a secure location where they could begin integration with the long-range surveillance team. The transfer would be presented as a routine personnel rotation to avoid confirming enemy intelligence about Sarah's identity and importance. Sarah's departure from FOB Chapman was kept quiet, with only essential personnel aware that she was leaving. Captain Rodriguez and the soldiers she had served with understood the security requirements, but the farewell was still emotional. Sarah had saved many of their lives through her precision shooting, and they had developed deep respect for her skills and dedication. As the helicopter lifted off from FOB Chapman, carrying Sarah toward her new assignment, she reflected on the extraordinary events of the past month. She had arrived at the base as a newly qualified sniper with limited combat experience. She was leaving as a proven warrior whose achievements would be studied by military professionals for years to come. The record-breaking 2,847-meter shot would become the subject of extensive analysis by ballistics experts, military historians, and tactical instructors. The precision required to eliminate a target at that distance, under combat conditions, represented a convergence of skill, training, equipment, and circumstances that few soldiers would ever experience. But, for Sarah, the shot's significance lay not in its technical achievement, but in the lives it had saved. The long-range surveillance team assignment took Sarah to remote areas throughout Afghanistan, where she provided precision shooting support for special operations missions against high-value targets. Her reputation had preceded her, and the special operations community quickly recognized her exceptional abilities. But the varied mission requirements and constantly changing operational areas made it much more difficult for enemy forces to develop specific countermeasures against her activities. Over the following months, Sarah participated in dozens of successful operations, eliminating enemy leaders, disrupting Taliban supply lines, and providing critical support for coalition forces operating in dangerous areas. Her precision shooting skills continued to develop, with several additional long-range successes that reinforced her reputation as one of the military's most effective snipers. The psychological impact of Sarah's achievements extended far beyond the specific targets she eliminated. Enemy communications intercepted by intelligence units revealed widespread concern among Taliban commanders about American sniper capabilities. Many enemy operations were canceled or modified due to fear of sniper engagement, creating a force multiplication effect that went well beyond the direct impact of Sarah's individual shots. After completing her deployment and returning to the United States, Sarah was awarded several commendations for her exceptional service, including the Silver Star for gallantry in action during the hostage rescue operation. The citation accompanying the award described her 2,847-meter shot as an extraordinary demonstration of marksmanship skill that resulted in the successful rescue of 200 innocent civilians. Sarah's experiences in Afghanistan led to her assignment as an instructor at the Army's Advanced Sniper School, where she shared her knowledge and experience with the next generation of precision shooters. Her classes on long-range engagement techniques, environmental considerations, and combat mindset became legendary among sniper students, who competed for the opportunity to learn from the soldier who had set new standards for precision shooting under combat conditions. The small-town girl from Texas who had learned to shoot on her grandfather's ranch had become one of the most respected snipers in military history. But Sarah remained humble about her achievements, always emphasizing that her success was built on the foundation of excellent training, dedicated teammates like Sergeant Kim, and the support of the soldiers she had served with throughout her career. Years later, when military historians wrote about the evolution of sniper tactics and the role of precision shooting in modern warfare, Sarah's achievements in Afghanistan would be cited as examples of how individual skill and dedication could have strategic impact on military operations. Her record-breaking shot would be analyzed in military academies and professional development courses as a case study in precision shooting under extreme conditions. Sarah's success opened doors for others while establishing new standards for excellence in one of the military's most demanding and critical specialties. When Sarah finally retired from active duty after 20 years of service, she returned to Texas to care for her aging grandfather and to work as a civilian instructor at military training facilities. She never spoke publicly about the specific details of her combat experiences, believing that her service was its own reward and that the soldiers she had served with deserved the credit for their collective achievements. But on quiet evenings at the family ranch, Sarah would sometimes set up targets at long range and practice the skills that had made her famous. Her grandfather, now in his 90s but still sharp, would watch her shoot and nod with satisfaction. He understood that his granddaughter had used the lessons he taught her about patience, respect, and precision to become something extraordinary. A guardian whose rifle had protected the innocent and defended the defenseless in places far from the Texas rangeland where her journey began. The sight picture through her scope, the calculations for wind and distance, the controlled breathing and smooth trigger pull. These fundamentals remained constant whether she was practicing on paper targets at the family ranch or engaging enemy forces at record-breaking distances in Afghanistan. But the purpose behind her shooting had transformed from recreational target practice to the defense of freedom and the protection of innocent lives. Sarah Martinez had proven that when skill meets courage, when training meets opportunity, and when dedication meets necessity, extraordinary achievements become possible. Her record-breaking shot at 2,847 meters would stand as a testament to human potential and the power of precision under pressure. But her true legacy would be measured in the lives she saved and the example she set for others who would follow in her footsteps.